Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. As always, I'm joined by Tim Miller. G'day, Tim. How are you?
Aaron, I'm going very well. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. Well, today we're going to talk about the topic of whether we can change a pension midstream. This goes back probably the best part of a decade or more when the NTLG was asked this question and ultimately came back with a response of it depends. Now, Tim, I guess there are a number of reasons why people might want to be looking at changing that pension, and certainly in the eyes of our Division 296 and the transfer balance cap over the last few years as well has certainly heightened the interest around the pros and cons of reversionary and non-reversionary. We're not going to get into that today, but I'm interested in your initial thoughts around this particular issue and what people need to be considering if they want to be making a change to that pension after that pension has commenced.
Yeah, and look, I guess the reality is for those of us that were around at the time, that a lot of this was driven primarily, and you just touched on it, around the concept of death, and particularly introduced to say, okay, well, the concept of reversionary versus non-reversionary, but also the introduction and expansion of binding death benefit nominations sort of suggested, to make a pension reversionary, could you just simply put in place a binding death benefit nomination, which is again one of the answers where the ATO came out with it depends as an option. And so all of these sorts of things stemmed from death benefits, stemmed from the exempt current pension income deduction and the issues associated with that, but also, again, from a lot of the Centrelink changes that have occurred over the last sort of 10 plus years. So it created this sort of, I guess, this friction point within the industry as to what you could actually do with your pensions to ensure that your pension met your requirements moving forward. And the key thing being, could you just retain what you've got and change the terms, or would you have to stop and start again?
Yeah, because what we have within the world of pensions is we have tax ruling guidance, don't we? So we have our TR 2013-5, which looks at the way in which a pension commences and ceases. And then we also have the standards. So within the operating standards, we have the requirements for that pension in which it must operate. And then the final piece of that jigsaw, of course, is we have our pension documentation, of which we need to align that back to the rules of the fund. And I guess the view is such that for us to have a pension, what we ultimately have here is a contract, and a contract that acts between the trustee that is empowered to be able to pay that pension to the member who's the beneficiary of their superannuation interest, and the member themselves. Now, they can be one and the same, they can wear different hats, but ultimately what we have here is a contract. And that has been the view for some period of time, where ultimately, when we think in a legal context, as long as we actually have parties that would agree to change the terms and conditions of that contract, well, then ultimately that would appear to be okay and wouldn't kind of go beyond the realms of what the SIS regs in essence outline, as long as we've continued to met those requirements. We haven't used it as security for borrowing, we've met the pension requirements, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, and look, and I think one of the things that you and I often discuss is that in this pension space, these rules haven't been tested through the courts. And so, whilst we talk a lot from court cases on binding death benefit nominations, the reality behind the it depends is, well, it depends because we just don't know, what the outcomes would be if it is thrown up in front of the judges. And so, one of the things, and you use the term pension contract there, we know that there would be thousands of pensions in existence that exist almost on the smell of an oily rag versus on the concept of a pension contract. And so there's this such a variation of what people have and what they believe might be a pension. And we also then have a 10-year gap between the finishing of reasonable benefit limits and the starting of the transfer balance cap, when nothing was ultimately reported to the tax office.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other element to this, why it becomes so important, is the fact that yes, it would be quite easy for us to go through and do a commutation and then repurchase. But you touched on then the fact that there are Centrelink implications. So the fact that if someone was drawing a pension at a particular point in time, well, maybe there was a level of asset test exemption that may have applied in respect to those, whether it in fully or partially, whatever the case may be. And probably more important than that, talking to trustees, is around the fact that the pension doesn't count for Commonwealth Seniors Health Card. So anyone that loses that, I'm sure you've had that conversation historically over the time as well. You never want a client to be able to lose their Commonwealth Seniors Health Card, and therefore that commutation and repurchase would get them into a situation whereby that pension income then does count, whereas under the old rules it didn't. So the importance, therefore, of being able to make those changes without commutation does become important, and therefore you do somewhat ride the gauntlet around the fact that, yes, it hasn't been challenged at court, but the view is as long as we've really complied with what the terms of the deed are and the terms of the contract, then we kind of move forward.
Yeah, and I think probably the importance there is ensuring that the terms of the contract align with the terms of the deed. So if you've got the ability to reference within the deed, that a pension needs to be paid in accordance with the pension contract, then it means you need to have a pension contract, and then that's where you can start to outline, okay, here are the scenarios where potentially we can look to change the existing terms of the pension.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, obviously, I've spoken about for quite a while now, is that reliance that the industry in many instances has on the pension documents that might come out of the SMSF software, and really doesn't connect the dots in a lot of instances back to the deed, and therefore the ability to undertake some of these things then does create much more risk around the client situation by the fact that you haven't actually connected the dots with those two documents. So one reason why, of course, with the Smarter SMSF documents and the pension, we create that as a special rule of the fund that in essence annexes that to the deed, and therefore any changes that would occur would naturally be agreed to those two parties. So you can't simply use a resolution and say, well, the trustees hereby decide to change the terms of that pension, because you need two parties, obviously, to the contract to ensure that that would occur. So a couple of things there that I think are really important to getting right. I think, Tim, as you said, this is something that is a unresolved question as such, but getting everything lined up, you are mitigating that as much as possible until at some point in time it's obviously going to be tested at law.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that it does is it gives us the scope to say, okay, well, why are the reasons that we're changing? Are we trying to protect that ECPI? Are we trying to override binding death benefit nominations? Are we looking to protect Social Security? So there's so many avenues that I know we both want to explore as we move forward in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you once again for joining me this week for our Feeling Smarter video series. Take care, everyone. See you next week. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.